Tonight, you will see that Armando's latest book has just been launched, and it is the historical fiction novel, The Night Travelers. We will be having a signing immediately following. A very brief intro, because it seems like no introduction is really necessary, but we'll have a very brief intro. Then I'll be very fortunate to be able to ask a few questions, and there'll be plenty of time for your questions. So it'll be a wonderful conversation this evening. Armando Lucas Correa is an award-winning journalist, editor, author, and the recipient of several awards from the National Association of Hispanic Publications and the Society of Professional Journalists. He's the author of the international bestseller, The German Girl, which is now being published in 13 languages. He lives in New York City with his partner and their 3 children. As I was preparing for tonight, I came across a quote that was about Armando's book, The German Girl. It was, "Books like this help us so we can have some change, so we can have more love for each other, or at least more tolerance, if not more love." After reading The Night Travelers, we will likely agree that this powerful message continues. I also have been listening to the news, as I'm sure many of you have, and I came across a quote Armando had made, which is, "We are all refugees trying to find our place in the world." Now, coming to tonight's book, The Night Travelers, there was a Goodreads review, and it said, "This is one historical that will keep you turning the pages and patting your eyes. Tears and lots of them will be shed. 5 huge stars from me. I highly recommend it, and that you have tons of tissues as you will need them." Aren't we fortunate to be here together to have this conversation with Armando this evening? Thankfully, as I mentioned, we will have time for Q&A, so be sure to silence your cell phones. Let's enjoy this discussion together, and please welcome Armando Lucas Correa. So I will kick off with a very simple but important question from the start of your book. Considering the epigraph from the poet Rumi, "Night travelers are full of light," who would you consider a night traveler in this novel? And what does it mean to be a night traveler in the various circumstances and eras in which these characters live?
Yeah. I remember I found the Rumi quote before I started writing the first sentence, and I was obsessed with the quote. And I know I want to have the idea that the whole book is around night. And when you're going to read it, you're going to realize that we're talking about a girl, Lily, that she's a Michelin. That was a pejorative term that during the Nuremberg law that Hitler created to refer to the mixed race. In this case, about Jewish with German, but in Lily is a Black German with a woman who is white. And when you are 7 years old, you have only 2 options: or go to the concentration camp or be sterilized. That's like a saving that the Michelin have. And then Lily is going to be 7 years old. The book started. That's the second chapter, because they start with the birth. And she's training her daughter to run away, and they leave at night. The whole book is living and dying, and of course, the first traveler is Lily. Yeah.
So you bring to life the eras and cities in which Ali, Lilith, and Nadine live with such wonderful detail and atmosphere. You make the reading experience very immersive. How do you go about making these times and places feel so vibrant?
I think in this book you can see my training, let's say that way. I am a journalist. My major was theater critic. I started my career as a theater and dance critic. And I am a reader. I always said I am a reader who writes. And you can see all this training in the book. Even I divided the book in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And I think that when the New York Times, the critic of the New York Times said that I have atmospheric style, I think this is positive or negative. But then I realized that I always conscious when I'm writing about the space, the light, the distance. And I wanted you to read the book like you are in a theater. And sometimes you are immersed in the atmosphere. For the German girl, I was obsessed with smell. And when Hannah arrived in Cuba, the smell, the weather is always part of the story. And sometimes I spend reading and researching and writing pages and pages, but my agent, as he's here, and she was my editor first. Sometimes you have to cut. I remember with the daughter's tale, that the protagonist is the owner of the bookstore, and it's during the days that they have to burn the books, during Hitler. I studied the smell of the burning books. I wrote like 12 pages because it's not the book like right now. Before there was leather and different kind of glue and different kind of paper, and I love to, but I know the pace is important, and I am the kind of writer that I write around over 300,000 words, and this book ended in 125, Johanna. Yes, 125,000.
So did you conclude then that was a positive thing from the critic?
I think so. I assume that is real.
I think this crowd might agree, positive. In writing your previous two novels, you'd already done a large amount of research into the many places, topics, and times that you explored in The Night Travelers. Was there new research that you needed to do for this one?
Oh, yeah. I remember that when I was doing the research or finishing the research for the German girl, preparing for the daughter's tale, we found my agent, my editor at that moment, an article about this little boy who was a Black German by the concentration camp. And then you always heard that Hitler killed over 6 million Jewish, but what happened to the 60,000 Black German, and it was because reading the story of this boy that became a soldier, and then during the liberation, moved to United States, and he lost all his family. And what happened to these people? 60,000 is a big number. And then, and my editor said, you have to write this book right now. I said, oh, wait, let's finish the daughter's tale, and let me, because I only have the idea of this German poet having the lily, and I am like a gardener. You need to plant and see how they're growing. And then you become an architect at the end, when you have the whole idea for the first draft and you start playing with the different parts. And I have to study a lot about eugenics. I even bought the book from 1924 for this doctor from Pasadena, that they created all these crazy eugenic science. And then it was passed to UK, and in all this book in English, Hitler had it in his library, and I want that edition from 1920, and I have it, and for me, why this happened? Hitler was inspired in a law created in United States in Pasadena, California, and if you don't know, here, they sterilized until 1970s, when you have some kind of mental problem, that was in a state like Virginia, for example. And then for me, it was a big surprise, and I love doing research. And I know this is fiction, but historical fiction. And I want you to know that if I say, for example, I always say during the St. Louis and German girl, if I say that day it was raining, believe me, it was raining. and that's the reason I have all this bibliography at the end, and you can see that everything that I'm telling you is true.
Well, those are a few things it sounds like surprised you. Were there any other things that surprised you that you could share with us?
What else? I think I always covering part of the history that we tend to put on the side. And my three book is the same. No, in the case of the St. Louis, you have an idea that's happened in 1939, and it was until 2008 during the Obama presidency that they did a kind of apology to all these 937 refugees that they denied, Roosevelt denied the entrance in the United States. It was in 2008. And exactly before the pandemic, I don't have control with the time after the pandemic, but I think it was in 2019 that I held the office of the Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada to invite 7 survivors from the boats. And I always ask, what is the reason that you have to wait too long? Because it's easier to say Hitler was the guy who killed 6 million. But when you said that United States, Canada, or Cuba in this case was part of the tragedy, you put it on the side. And the other one, it was the Orador sur Glane. This is a small village in France. Now, one day, a beautiful Saturday in June 1940, the Germans arrived and they put all the women and children inside the church, 632, and they burned them alive. And what is the reason we don't hear about that? Even I traveled for research to Limoges. Limoges is the big town that they have for Orador sur Glane, like 15 minutes outside, and nobody know what is Orador sur Glane. Even for the French people. And they have translated to French the German girl, but they don't want to translate the Dorisel. It's hard for them because it was the Nazi who made the order. But the soldiers, they were French, and and it's the same with eugenic. Okay, Hitler built the Nuremberg race law based in these two doctors from Pasadena, California. And we never talk about it. And it's always for me, interesting trying to find this part of the history that we need to, that happened, and it can happen again. Yeah.
So it sounds like you included many of these things in the book. Were there things you learned that you did not include in the book?
Yes. One of the other critic, I think, what case was is too much information. And for me, because I have 3 children, I have, Emma is 17 and the twins are 13. And if you talk to them about the World War II, for them it's like 2 centuries ago, not like us, no? And I always try to put a connection with the present from the past. And that's is the reason that I'm not spoiling the novel, but the reason when Alice sent Lily by herself with a Jewish family to Cuba. And then Lily, in the middle of the Cuban Revolution, they kill her husband and she has to send her daughter by herself to United States in something called Operation Peter Pan, that they send over 14,000 children to save them for the Communist Party. And when I was writing the book, it was in the middle of the crisis in the border between Mexico and the US with these cages, putting children by themselves, and a ton of families sending the children alone. And I remember going to Miami, my whole family lived in Miami. And I remember this mother saying, I can't believe how this woman sent their children by themselves. And you're reading the news, criticizing this woman. And I said, you can't do that. You have to think about it, the operation at Peter Pan, and think about the kinder transport. And in Germany, they send over 10,000 children, and they're alive now because their parents were killed in Auschwitz. And then you never know. Maybe I can say I can save my children, but I am not in the same position. I'm always trying to find this connection from the past to the present organically. This is a message. It's not a kind like it's conscious that I have want to send this message. That when you're reading, even when you're seeing what happened in Germany, and you see what happened in the Cuban Revolution with these concentration camps, with the same slogan from Auschwitz, and all this propaganda, how this dictatorship is using the past, it can happen again, and it's happening. You see, I think dictators learn from the from the other ones all the time. Yeah.
It's true. Staying on the topic of real life, this is about a real life portion of it. So Irma Bronze was inspired by the real life stomping mare, Hermione Bronstein Ryan. Why did you decide you wanted to weave that particular figure into Nadine's life? What interested you about the real life story and made you think it would work well for the?
Yeah, that was a tough part of that when I was building the story, and even I used that woman, for most of the people is a monster, and I used the doctor in the concentration camp, the Jewish doctor, she did all this abortion to this woman, and for them she was a monster. And you have to know that this doctor, after the war, she became one of the famous doctors in the Mercy Hospital, Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And she wouldn't try many times, but she said, I'm saving your life because you're pregnant, you're gonna be killed in the concentration camp. And she did all this abortion with the hand, without anesthesia. It was like a very, and the other woman, then she was called Mare, no?
Yes, something there.
And she always separated the children from the woman. But in the trial, she said that it was the only way to save them. And she separated, with the kicking them. It was like and she was in Yale for a couple of years after the war. She married this American soldier, and they moved to New York. She's Catholic, and during the Operation Peter Pan, they adopted Nadine, one of the characters. And what is bad and what is good? What is, I always, in my mind, there is always gray zone in this life, and she has something good, she did great with Nadine at the beginning. And that is gonna save her at the end. I don't know, this is some of the questions I always have as a writer and as a reader too.
Simple questions,
Yeah.
difficult answers. So as you were writing The Night Travelers, what was your experience writing, especially compared to your other novels? Were there any elements that were either more difficult or easier?
I think the German Girl, it was like it was my first novel. I didn't know how many words I can write per day. I during those years I have like a very busy life. I was editor-in-chief of the magazine. I have my 3 children, they were small. I have to write after reading them. And then after 9 p.m. I write until midnight, and then the next morning editing before my office started crazy, And my goal, it was like a 500, 1,000 word per day. And I was writing like, it was always like emotional, because I have been working with the St. Louis for over 10 years. At the beginning, I have almost a small museum from the St. Louis. I have artifacts from the war, original menus, the diary from the captain, currency, and I was, because I am a journalist, I was thinking to do like a nonfiction book with interview with the survivor, talking to the academic. But when I had Emma in 2005, everything changed. And then I decided to write from the point of view of the father. And Emma gave voice to Anna and Hannah. And I remember the first sentence of the book, it was, I'm gonna be something like that. I'm gonna be 9 years old. I decided to kill my parents. And then in a couple of months, it was 10 years, and then 11. And when Emma was 12, the book went to print. And then Hannah and Anna, they were 12 years old. And it was a different kind of experience. You know, it was my first book. I worked really hard with my editor, Johanna. I remember her reading the last 3 pages and talking at 2 a.m. in the morning. And I enjoyed really, and you know, and for me it was a big surprise. The book became a bestseller in Australia, in Canada, in Sweden, in Colombia, and then in the United States. And right now it's more than 13. We're in 17 languages right now, and we sold the rights to the, you know, to a TV series with Hollywood and production. And then when I was writing The Daughter Still, I do it in another way. It was more like trying to play with words, and you know, I feel more like a writer when I was writing. I put a instant. It was in third person. With The Night Traveler, I think it's more mature. You know, I feel I had more time to write. I know how many words I can, or I know that when I finish my first draft, I can play with the pages like a puzzle. You know, if you go to my office, it's like a crazy person. I have papers and I have the tree with the families and names, and this chapter is going here, and then I can change from the first person to the third, and then the back and forth with a story, because I did it not because it's some kind of acrobatic literary. I did it because if you are seeing this woman having this girl in panic and almost thinking that it's better that she died than survive in this environment, you have to understand why. And then you go back 5 years before, you know, it's this kind of thing. You are seeing the reality and you need to go back. And my 2 favorite chapters of the book is in the third act, when you go back 75 years before, and then you can see what happened with Ali. I love that chapter.
Do you think of your 3 novels, The German Girl, A Daughter's Tale, and Night Travelers, as a trilogy? Was it emotional to leave this world behind?
Not really. This kind of when I never thought that I was writing a trilogy, but this is a marketing thing from the publishing house. Even my agent, my editor, we never talk about trilogy because, you know, I can still writing about my next novel is going to be completely different, and the one that I'm writing right now is about the 20th century in Cuba, inspiring my grandmother. She arrived in Cuba her parents arrived from Spain 1900, and she died by the end of the century. The whole history about Guantanamo and even exiling New York, coming back to Cuba, and then maybe the other gonna go back to the World War II. You never know. But I think that the 3 of them, they have a connection for the San Luis. You know, the first one is dedicated to the San Luis. The second one, you know, the bookstore owners sent one daughter to Cuba in the San Luis. That's the mention. And in this one, Lily arrived in Cuba in the San Luis. You know. That's the kind of connection for the trilogy.
Wonderful.
But you can read it, you know, you can start with book 1.
This will be my last question, and then we'll open it up so you can have your questions and comments ready. So what do you hope that people take away from this book as well as your novels as a whole?
I think, and I remember when I was promoting the book in Australia, someone said that if my book was inspired in the Syrian refugee crisis, you remember all these Syrians running around Europe trying to find a place. And I said, if you see my book right now, you have it. We finished like 2 years ago, you know, before the crisis, because I write it in Spanish, it's translated in UK, then it's back to me. I edited in English with my editor, and it took like 2 years. Nothing, you know, when I was writing, I never thought about the Syrian crisis. And I realized that all my books, at the same I am a Cuban refugee, I left my country in 1991. I have to start from zero here. I created my family. That my book is always about the difference. We always afraid of the other one, and the people who has a different skin color or a different kind of accent or a different sexual orientation or the people who believe in a different God or have a different religion. Until the day we respect that we are all different and we respect all the different that we have, I think the world is going to be better. And all my books is about that, I think.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank
this and
you.
also for continuing the conversation.
Yeah.
So I will turn it over. Questions, thoughts, comments?
I'm sorry, I have a question about San Luis. Is that a city, a place in Cuba, or I'm not sure the reference?
The San Luis, it was a boat
A boat?
with over 937 Jewish refugees, all of them with permit to disembark in Havana, and they pay a fortune for this permit and the tickets. And they have to buy a round trip ticket in the boat when they left Germany. And when
Okay.
they arrived in Cuba, it was May 27, 1939, they denied the entrance to only 28 passengers disembarked because they paid $500 that it was required for the president of Cuba at that moment. My grandmother was pregnant with my mom when the boat arrived, and I was obsessed with this story because when I was a child in the 70s and 80s in Cuba, my grandmother said, Cuba is going to pay very dearly because what they did to these Jewish refugees. And when I arrived in US, I started, reading, collecting everything related to the story until I built the German girl around the St. Louis. And there is around, I think from the passenger, when they deny the entrance, they trying to go to United States because most of them they have visa, but they have to wait, sometimes 5 years until they have available the entrance. And they deny the entrance in the United States. They trying to go to Canada. They were denied to by Mackenzie, the prime minister. And when they went in the middle of the ocean, they got a refugee in Belgium, Poland, France, and UK. And the only who survived the war was the one in UK because in September, World War II started. Most of them ended in, extermination concentration camp. I met some of the survivors. I have like 3 girls in New York. They go to all my presentation in New York. And I found one in Canada. And, they were 14 months or 4 years old. The one in Canada, she was 4 years old. And I was obsessed with this story. Even, I think the only country that we're waiting for the apology is Cuba.
So they went to Cuba, then the United States, and then Canada,
Yeah,
and were denied entrance.
exactly.
Wow. See what we don't know, right? Yeah.
And how fortunate you were obsessed with that story from
Right. That-
When Obama opened the diplomatic relationship, I was invited because I was a of a magazine in New York, and I was invited with the delegation of publishers and editors. And my agent said, "You have to go, Armando, because your market is going to be out soon, and there are going to be people. I work for people from the industry, booksellers." And we went, and for me it was very emotional because it was my first time that I was allowed to come back. And I see the Havana for the same point of view with the St. Louis because I went to the other side of the harbor. That before it was a Yale, and now they celebrate the book festival there. And I promised to this small Holocaust museum that they have in Havana that I'm gonna donate all my artifacts from the St. Louis, and my editor is gonna bring 100 copies. And the next year we arrive, and they retain all the books when we arrive in Havana. They ban the book, And they want to cancel the presentation that this woman from it's called Separatist Center from Havana, that she fought for 10 years to have back her synagogue from her grandfather. And with the help of Steven Spielberg and the government of Israel, she got it. And they said, you are gonna do it, because I invited, the ambassador from Canada, from Holland, she invited CNN, Reuters, and I did a presentation in panic. My mother testing me, be careful, because you never know what happened in Cuba. And they kept the 100 copies of the book. And I did a donation, and they have it there. And I say, I am done with Cuba, because every year is something different and new. But they have a couple of books and my artifacts, and they sort of the sandwich there for the future.
You haven't been back since?
Hmm?
You haven't been back to Cuba since?
No. After that, I decided that I have to put Cuba for my sanity on the side.
Questions, comments?
So was it the St. Louis and that story that made you concentrate on World War II, that era?
I think so. I think it was part of I was a kind of kid during, when I was a child, that I read books that were not appropriate. Maybe I never read about cowboys or, the kind of adventure books. I remember I read Madame Bovary at 10 years old. Read everything that was, drinking vinegar to lose weight like Madame Bovary. I think that there is no book inappropriate for a child. I read 100 Years of Solitude when I was 12, and for me it's like a reading porn. It was the thing when you read it when you're an adult is completely different. And for me, the World War II, I was obsessed because I remember reading all this book, and it's my grandfather. He was obsessed with history and have a lot of biography too. And I always thinking, because you always spur, for me, I can understand that the Holocaust happened and the war to happen in the most civilized country in the world. It was Germany, the most civilized continent in the world. That's happening in Africa, in Latin America, but in Europe, in Germany, and then is that happening in that country with one of the most stronger democracies in the world in that continent? What happened for the rest of us? And for me, it was really hard to understand the Second World War. I remember when my daughter Emma read the book, she was 12 years old. She said, "Well, why? For a child, it's really hard to understand what is the difference from this." And that's the reason the title, most about the magazine that is related in the book, The German Girl, because they were Jewish, but they were German for fifth generation. And they were blonde and blue and rich. It's crazy. And as a child, I was obsessed with that part of the history. A little crazy. Yeah.
One more question as we wrap up. Comment, question?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is the first presentation for the Night Traveler.
A special round of applause.